Hi, I'm designer Olivia Aspinall and I'm going to be showing you how to make a terrazzo tray. So we're going to be using an eco-casting resin to make some of our own terrazzo chips and pour them into a mould. This is going to be a medium-sized tray that's really useful for jewellery or keys or any small bits around the house, sort of like a catch-all. On my table today to help me make this, I've got some scales, my eco-resin, which is a liquid and a powder, a range of water-based pigments, my silicone mould for casting into, some cups and bowls that I'm going to use for mixing in, and some wet and dry sandpaper for sanding. Today I've got a tray mould we've made ourselves in the studio, but any silicone mould that you can get your hands on will work perfectly. So I'm going to weigh out my liquid first into 1 cup. I'm using 125 grams, and this is my Jesmonite AC 100 liquid. And I'm just going to set that to one side. In a separate cup, I'm going to weigh out my powder. Now when you're working with Jesmonite AC 100, you always work with 1 part liquid to 2.5 parts powder. So because I've used 125 grams of liquid, I'm going to use 312.5 grams of powder. It's quite important to follow the 1 part to 2.5 part ratio, because it's this ratio that makes the material set. So I'm now going to add pigment to my mixture, and I'm going to add the pigment into my liquid. I'm going to pop my liquid cup back on the scales. I'm going to make a blue. I'm going to add 10 grams of white. Got a very small amount of blue in here, so I'm adding 0.25 grams of blue. Finally, I'm adding, again, 0.25 grams of code. So now I'm mixing all those pigments together within my liquid. What I've done is create kind of like a dusky blue. Once you're happy with your pigmented liquid, the next stage is to add your powder into your liquid and give it a really good mix. So, as I mentioned before, once you've mixed the two materials together, the reaction between them starts. So, at this stage, you're trying to get all the lumps of the powder out, but with a bit of speed so that you're not letting the material set in the cup. You want to still be able to work with it. So I'm just checking that there's no lumps of powder left in the mixture, and I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to pour this out onto this plastic sheet that I've got next to me. And I'm going to spread this onto the sheet. I'm not worried too much about how neat it is or the thickness at this stage, because this is all going to be broken up to make my terrazzo chips. So I'm happy now with how I've poured that out on the sheet. I'm just going to put this to one side and let it set for about 10 to 20 minutes. The materials start to go matte on the surface, and then that means we should be able to break it up into our terrazzo chips. So I've got another colour here that I'm going to add to my palette. This one's already set, it's gone matte and it's gone nice and firm. So I'm just going to break this one up and get it ready. So I'm just breaking this one into really random shapes. I kind of want the natural difference between all the different chips. So I'm just going to put this one to one side. I've got a bag of chips here that I've already prepared. You can see my orange and blue in the palette there, and I've added a few more colours. So this palette's got 6 coloured chips in, but you can do any number that you like. So next I'm going to weigh out my liquid, powder, pigment and terrazzo chips ready for my main pour into my silicone mould. I'm going to start by weighing out my terrazzo. So in this instance I want 240 grams of chips. This is going to give me a nice dense pattern in my tray. I'm going to weigh out my liquid into this jug here. I'm using 170 grams of the Jesmonite AC 100. So I want my background on this tray to be white, so I'm going to add 12 grams of white pigment. So I'm going to weigh out my powder now. So I've got 430 grams in that bucket there. Okay, so now I've got my liquid with my pigment, my powder and my terrazzo chips all ready to mix together and pour into my mould. I'm going to add my powder into my liquid and give that a really good mix again. So once you've mixed your liquid and your powder together, the material's got about a 20-minute pot life, depending on the temperature in the room. So you want to be working quickly and always be prepared with your mould ready and your workspace nice and clean. So I'm happy now with how I've mixed my liquid and my powder together. I'm going to add my terrazzo chips and give them a really good mix around as well. So I'm happy with my mixture and how my terrazzo chips have been distributed through it. I'm going to now pour into my silicone mould. So I'm going to pour into my mould, trying to keep the mixture as evenly distributed as possible. I like to pour into the centre of mould and from a slight height. I'm going to pour in stages. What I don't want to do is overfill the mould. So I'm just going to let that mixture settle down. And I'm just gently shaking the mould to let the mixture fall into the sides. What I am going to do is just agitate the mould slightly to make sure everything's evenly distributed, and also give it a tap so that any air bubbles come from the bottom of the mould to the back of the mould, which the bottom of the mould becomes the front surface of your final piece. So I'm really happy now with how that mixture's gone into the mould. I'm going to let that set for about half an hour to an hour. Full cure on the material is 24 hours, but you should be able to demould in about an hour to then start sanding. So I've let my tray sit in the mould for about an hour, and now I'm going to demould it so I can start the sanding process. I'm going to be super careful when I'm demoulding, taking my time to work around the mould and really gently release the tray. So I've removed my tray from the mould. You can see some of the pattern coming through, but this isn't how it's going to look finished. I'm now going to use a wet and dry sanding process to reveal my terrazzo pattern. So I'm going to use two different grits for wet and dry sanding. I'm going to start with a rougher grit. I've got a 120 here to reveal all the pattern. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to use a 240 grit to take out any scratches and finish off the surface. So I'm going to submerge my piece as well as my wet and dry sandpaper in water. This helps to reduce any dust and is also makes it easier to sand so that the paper doesn't get clogged on my resin. But I'm going to do the sides, the top and the inside, being very careful not to disturb the form of my tray. So I'm kind of applying a bit of pressure, but not too much. I don't want to distort my design. So I've finished sanding with my 120 grit. You can keep going with this as long as you want to reveal as much pattern as you'd like to be revealed within your tray. I'm happy with how this is looking, so I'm going to move on to my next grit, which is a 240, which is a finer wet and dry sandpaper. Now that's just going to smooth off the material and take out any scratches that I've put in with that rougher sandpaper. So again, with this sandpaper, you can keep going as much as you want and just till you're happy with how the surface feels. I think I'm done with mine, so what I'm going to do is dry this off and just leave it to air dry until all the moisture's come out of the material. There's a couple of finishing touches you can do. I like to wax the surface of my finished terrazzo to give it a nice little seal and also to make the colours pop. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to find out more about me and my process, check out my online course with Domestika. You'll find the link in the description below.